and welcome to Vedic Astrology for Beginners. My name is Elena, I'm a professional Vedic astrologer, and in this video series, I teach absolute beginners how to confidently read your birth chart from scratch, step by step. In this video, I will show you how to put together your own birth chart interpretations using planets, zodiac signs, and houses with Stephen King's chart as an example. We will also see how these placements reflected in his real life, since he's a public person and we know quite a bit about him. This video is a more practical resource in my Astrology for Beginners series, where we've already looked at the meanings of the 9 planets, 12 zodiac signs, and 12 houses in the birth chart. Be sure to check out these earlier videos for a reference on any of these points if you need a refresher, since we are going to be using the meanings of all of these planets, zodiac signs, and houses to build the interpretations. Now, let's see how to put the meanings together. In the previous videos, we've covered that the planets are the what of the birth chart, the zodiac signs are the how, and the houses or the areas of life are the where, meaning that the planets are the what causes certain events or certain characteristics take shape in your life. The zodiac signs are the how these certain characteristics and these activities take place in your life, what sort of character they have, and how they can be described. And the houses are the where, meaning they're the areas of life where planets exude their influence and where you can expect each planet's influence to take shape in your life. Now, when you look at a person's birth chart, there are 6 key placements that you want to analyze in order to start getting a portrait of the personality whose chart you're looking at. Let's look at them together, referencing Stephen King's birth chart, who is a well-known American author of the horror fiction novels. The first thing we need to look at is what is the sign of the first house, aka what is the ascendant or the rising sign. In Vedic astrology, this is the person's main zodiac sign, not the sun sign, the rising sign, or the ascendant. And if you're curious as to why, I published a video recently where I talk about the big 3 placements in Vedic astrology, so there's ample explanation given in that video. The ascendant or the rising sign describes our core personality traits, our values, beliefs, and even to a degree our appearance. This is the sign that fits the top diamond of the North Indian birth chart style, which is what I'm referencing in these videos. Here is Stephen King's chart, and as we can see from his top diamond, he is Cancer rising. Some of the characteristics of Cancer that apply to Stephen King's personality is this deep fascination with human psyche, human nature, and behavior, as well as his empathy. He allows his characters to evolve organically without really forcing them into strict predetermined narratives. His writing is backed by an intuitive understanding of human psychology and a constant drive to turn personal anxieties into compelling stories. The empathy, the desire to understand human behavior, and fascination with human nature overall are some of the core personality traits for the Cancer zodiac sign, which is something we've recently examined in the Cancer zodiac sign video from my Zodiac Signs Explained series. That being said, the Cancer zodiac sign and therefore the ascendant and the first house of Stephen King's birth chart have other notable placements which make him, shall we say, not a very typical Cancer. And here I'm referencing Mars and Saturn being placed in his first house. Which brings us to the second important point to consider when building a personality profile in the birth chart. Are there any planets in the first house? Because if so, then these planets are going to become very personal in how they show up in the person's life, since the first house is the house of self, body, appearance, and really everything that is you. So when there is a planet in the first house, its qualities manifest very strongly in the person's life and character. Now, Stephen King has 2 planets here, Saturn and Mars, so let's see how Saturn and Mars qualities find their way in Stephen King's personality. Saturn's meanings include discipline, hard work, problems, limitations, delays, and obstacles. Being placed in the first house of Stephen King's chart, these characteristics apply to his body and his personality. We know that Stephen is a very disciplined and hardworking writer who authored over 50 books in his writing career. He is famously dedicated to his writing and openly shares that his process involves writing 2,000 words a day, 7 days a week. Such a level of dedication and hard work that Stephen King has is definitely a Saturn-inspired quality. Mars is also placed in the first house, so some of its meanings, which include initiative, energy, drive, frustration, trauma, anger, and conflict can find their way into Stephen King's life, in particular as it relates to his body and his personality. Now, Mars in first house in general can leave a person with scars, tattoos, and bodily marks, since this is a planet whose function is to hurt. And when it is placed in the person's first house, it can create circumstances where a person has any markings or physical manifestations of having been hurt. Now, Stephen King has suffered a very serious accident in the 1990s when he was hit by a van. The incident left him with a shattered right leg, a broken hip, fractured spine, and collapsed lung, all of which are serious injuries that he is still suffering from, as he still has some mobility issues 30 years later. Yet despite this, he maintains his day-to-day activities and an impressive writing speed, despite a permanent limp and residual pain that he is still suffering from due to the metal hardware in his leg. You can say he's somewhat of a warrior, which is a reflection of Mars in the first house. I should note that Mars and Saturn are malefic planets, and anytime malefic planets find themselves in houses 1, 4, 7, and 10, in particular the first house, this can add quite a bit of struggle into a person's life or negatively impact a person's health. Stephen King lived through many traumatic events, the van accident being one of them, but also he's faced some really morbid and traumatic events as a kid. For example, when he was little, he has seen his childhood friend be tragically killed by a train before Stephen King's eyes. Also, Mars signifies anger. So when it is placed in the first house of body and self, a person can often be angry with themselves or just turn their frustrations on themselves. Saturn is the harsh critic part of ourselves, and when it is placed in the first house, a person can be extremely critical and demanding of themselves. If you combine these two meanings together, you get somebody who is extremely self-critical and expects absolute perfection from themselves. Now, one of the interesting facts about Stephen King is that he threw a draft of his breakthrough novel Carrie into the trash, and it is only thanks to his wife, who convinced him to pick it up and finish it, that we now know of Carrie and arguably Stephen King as a writer. Moreover, with Saturn and Mars being malefic planets placed into the Cancer zodiac sign, now these two planets negatively affect the qualities of the Cancer zodiac sign, so throughout his life, Stephen King can deal with the more negative manifestations of Cancer zodiac sign. For example, one of Cancer meanings is childhood, and we know that Stephen King's was a very difficult one, not only because of some of the morbid and traumatic pictures that he's seen growing up, but also because his father abandoned his family when Stephen King was really young, and his mother had to work several jobs just to make ends meet, and they were really struggling as a family. On top of that, they've had to move several times throughout Stephen King's childhood between 3 different states. Now, when Cancer is negatively impacted in the birth chart, one of the ways that this can manifest is the person can be prone to addiction. And we know that for a long period of time in the 80s and the 90s, Stephen King was openly battling a severe alcohol and cocaine addiction, using his darkest personal struggles to fuel his iconic horror writing. He has been sober since, but more recently he has expressed that he has concerns and even anxiety over developing cognitive decline like dementia. Some other interpretations of Mars and Saturn being placed in Cancer can have a person be rather passive-aggressive, suppressing their emotions, be very emotionally cold and detached, calculating, and even manipulative, and overall insensitive. We cannot, however, get confirmation for any of these things because these are more personal qualities that you would only come in contact with when you know Stephen King personally and intimately, which is definitely not the case for myself. Moving on with a personality analysis. The third placement that you want to look at is the position of the moon in the sign and the house of the birth chart. This is the placement that is going to show how a person's mind works, how they see the world, how they understand it, how they perceive it, through which lens they're looking at it, as well as the house that the moon is placed in will tell us what area of life a person can find this emotional satisfaction in and what area of life can recharge their mental and emotional battery. Stephen King's moon is in Scorpio in the 5th house in combination with Jupiter and Ketu. Scorpio signs meanings include the occult, mysticism, very intense dramatic feelings and emotions, a certain darkness, if you will, transformation, strong intuition, and just visceral, razor-sharp experiences. And we see this very much with Stephen King, given that he is a horror novel author, but also in his writing, there are themes of mystical and paranormal activity. Moon in Scorpio is wired for anticipating danger and tension, and a person whose moon is in Scorpio walks the life as if they're always walking on a tightrope. They're always waiting for things to go wrong, they're always waiting for danger, and they're just generally very distrustful of their environments, which is a lot of the time why Scorpio moons can be quite tense, as they often struggle from inability to relax. Stephen King took this thrilling mind of his and he leveraged it into writing thriller and horror stories that keep us at the edge of our seats. And in part, he was so successful at doing so because his mind is already wired at seeing the world in this way, imagining it through the lens of danger. Of course, not every person with a moon in Scorpio is going to make a successful horror fiction writer. However, many people with moon in Scorpio are going to be attracted to the paranormal, the mystical, the occult, certain detective stories, thrillers, or other themes where there is an element of danger. The moon here is placed in the 5th house of children, creativity, and authorship, suggesting that Stephen King is a very creative person who has the capacity to produce a lot of creative work, in part because in doing so, this is what helps him relax and helps him mentally recharge. With a placement like this, we can confidently say that creative work is something that brings a lot of deep emotional satisfaction to Stephen King and nurtures his life. The 4th placement we're going to look at for personality analysis is the sun sign and house. This will still show some of the person's core qualities, but these are deeper qualities and the ones that we shine through in the outer world. So the sun sign in the birth chart can tell us what are the parameters and the qualities for which a person can succeed, shine through, and serve others. The house where the sun is placed is an important area of life, because this is the area of life that is important for the person to master, find fulfillment, and be in the leading role of their life, so to speak. Stephen King's sun is placed in Virgo in the 3rd house, together with Mercury and Venus. We can interpret this placement in the following way. This is a person who can become successful and fulfill his potential in the communications and the writing field, since both the 3rd house meanings and Virgo zodiac sign meanings are related to writing and communication. This is a very creative person who has a lot of creative ideas and who puts effort into bringing these ideas to life. We see this because the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are all planets that deal with creativity, and they're placed in the 3rd house of initiative, own efforts, and creativity. Also, since Sun, Mercury, and Venus are placed in Virgo, where Mercury is the strongest out of all of them since Mercury rules Virgo, the inclination of the creative efforts here are going to be related to Mercury, and this includes communication, writing, literary pursuits, and publishing. We, of course, know this to be true for Stephen King. The 5th placement we want to look at in the personality analysis is the position of the chart ruler or Lagna Lord in the zodiac sign and the house. Now, bear with me for a moment because this is a concept that is unique to Vedic astrology. The chart ruler or Lagna Lord is a planet that rules the zodiac sign of your 1st house. And in ruling the 1st house or the ascendant, it becomes the ruler of your entire birth chart. And it becomes a planet that represents you. The sign this planet is placed in will also give you some core personality traits. And the house where this planet goes to is the area of life that becomes sort of like a natural priority, a foundation of your life, the area of life which is the most important for you. Since Stephen King is Cancer rising, his chart ruler is the moon, and the moon, as we already know, is placed in the Scorpio zodiac sign in the 5th house of his birth chart. So this makes the areas of the 5th house, which are children, creativity, authorship, intelligence, and education, the main priorities of Stephen King's life. Now, Moon as the Lagna Lord or the chart ruler is placed in Scorpio, and this doubly emphasizes the importance of the Scorpio zodiac sign and its qualities in Stephen King's life. It should be said that Scorpio is a more difficult sign for the Moon. It's actually a sign where the Moon is debilitated, meaning that it is weakest here. Since Moon represents mental stability, emotional comfort, an ability to be at peace with the world and mental health, Scorpio moons often struggle with their ability to relax, to be at peace with others, with themselves, with the circumstances. They often experience tension, they're often distrustful of others, and can even go through traumatic or difficult mental experiences in their life. We of course know that this was the case for Stephen King since early childhood, where he's witnessed the death of his friend, but he has also experienced a lot of traumatic events in his childhood. The traumas that he continues to channel into his creative work. In a way, writing horror stories and drafting these characters and personalities helps Stephen King process through some of his own trauma and emotions that he's experienced as a child. Lastly, some charts will have a cluster of planets, cluster meaning 3 and more, in a zodiac sign and therefore a house. People who have these placements will very strongly show the characteristics of the zodiac sign, and the areas of life that are represented by the house that the zodiac sign fits will be very strongly pronounced and emphasized in a person's life. Stephen King has 2 such clusters, one in Virgo, another one in Scorpio, and they fall into the 3rd and the 5th house respectively. Off the bat, we can say that this is a person for whom the creative work, creativity, and channeling his creativity into published work is going to be an absolute priority in his life, since both the 3rd and the 5th house deal with creativity, authorship, and self-expression. Let's look at what other additional personality traits this would give to Stephen King. Virgo is all about method, routine, habit, and repetition. So a person who has several planets in Virgo can be quite methodical, disciplined, and have a certain integrity about their work. Since the sun is placed here in Virgo, you can even go so far as to say that this is a person who can become successful through developing and showing Virgo qualities, such as daily work, routine, dedication, and consistent habits. We see this with the way Stephen King approaches his work. He treats writing as a blue-collar job, emphasizing consistency over waiting for a time when inspiration hits. He writes about 2 hours a day and aims for a strict daily quota before taking any time to rest and relax. Scorpio qualities would be even more dominant for his personality, potentially the most dominant. His moon is in Scorpio. Since he is Cancer rising, moon doubles as the Lagna Lord, so Lagna Lord is also in Scorpio. And on top of that, we have 2 other planets placed in Scorpio, meaning that the Scorpio zodiac sign features the moon, Lagna Lord, and other planets. All in all, we can say that Scorpio is definitely the most dominant sign in his chart. We've already discussed the effects of Moon in Scorpio and how they will apply strongly here, in particularly anything in the intuitive and transformative sense, since Ketu is also placed strongly here in Scorpio conjunct the Moon. But let's also look at Jupiter. Jupiter's placement in Scorpio makes the Scorpio zodiac sign qualities better and grants Stephen with intuitive wisdom and deep understanding of human behavior and the most difficult experiences and manifestations of the human psyche. Jupiter helps Scorpio express in the best possible way, and one of the higher manifestations of Scorpio is this intense psychological power to deal with hardships as you navigate life. In his creative universe, Stephen King often manifests his own creative energy as the shine, a psychic power used by his characters to navigate battle or heal, which is a metaphor for his own intense mental agility. Arguably, Scorpio's dominant expression in Stephen King's birth chart is the reason why we know of him today, in particular why we know of him as a horror fiction novelist. This is the person who dealt with a lot of trauma, hardship, and trouble in life and channeled it as inspiration into his creative work. We see Scorpio's transformative power at work here as he uses horror as a cathartic medium to process deep, visceral human anxieties, including paranoia and isolation of his substance abuse, as seen in characters like Jack Torrance in The Shining. This is it for an introductory look at how to interpret birth chart patterns and at the life of Stephen King. Please note that there's more to the art and science of building birth chart interpretations, including interpreting planetary placements in nakshatra constellations, being able to spot and qualify yogas in the birth chart, as well as interpreting things like planetary conjunctions and how planets manifest when they come in contact with one another. But this is sufficient to give you a starting point to start building your own birth chart interpretations. It's also very important to work on your observation skills, as this will help you spot and develop a very good understanding of how certain planets manifest in zodiac signs and what are the limitless effects of these placements can be. Something that no astrology textbook, video, course, or guide will ever teach you, and something that only comes with practice. Lastly, it's important to know that this knowledge helps you build psychological interpretation of a person, so you can see things like what they are, what's important to them, how they see the world, what are the areas of life that they naturally gravitate to, and what are their priorities. This is all excellent stuff if you want to understand the person whose chart you're reading more. However, this is not yet sufficient to start making predictions. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe to my channel to be notified of the upcoming videos, and also leave me a comment with your interpretation of the placements in Stephen King's birth chart to start practicing these skills. Take care!